Imagine a world where mighty empires stretch across continents, their cities alive with the sounds of merchants, artisans, and travelers from distant lands. Picture grand palaces rising above bustling marketplaces, ships laden with exotic goods arriving at busy harbors, and roads connecting kingdoms in a web of commerce and culture. This was a world where innovation thrived, where rulers sent envoys to distant courts, and where the written word was etched onto clay tablets, preserving stories, treaties, and trade agreements for generations to come. Now, imagine all of this vanishing, almost overnight. Within the span of a single lifetime, the vibrant cities fell silent, their streets deserted, their walls crumbling. The world that had seemed so stable and prosperous was suddenly gone, leaving only empty ruins and haunting questions behind. This was the reality of the Late Bronze Age, a period that spanned from about 1550 to 1200 BCE. It was an era marked by remarkable sophistication and a level of interconnectedness across the eastern Mediterranean that would not be seen again for centuries. Kingdoms and city-states flourished, linked by trade, diplomacy, and shared ideas. Great powers like Egypt, the Hittites, and the Mycenaeans dominated the region. They built monumental palaces and temples, developed complex systems of writing, and exchanged luxury goods, gold, ivory, spices, and fine pottery, across vast distances. Their scribes recorded everything from royal decrees to epic tales, and their merchants navigated perilous seas to keep the wheels of commerce turning. But around 1200 BCE, this glittering world began to unravel. In a matter of decades, cities that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble. The collapse was sudden, widespread, and devastating, leaving behind a landscape of destruction and uncertainty. Cities were burned and abandoned, empires that had seemed invincible simply disappeared from the historical record, and the entire region was plunged into a centuries-long, dark age. The achievements of generations were lost, and the survivors faced a world transformed by chaos and loss. The intricate international system that had connected these civilizations unraveled almost completely. Trade routes that once bustled with activity fell silent, literacy and record-keeping all but vanished. And the once mighty kingdoms became little more than memories, their monuments left to crumble in the dust. For centuries, historians and archaeologists have puzzled over this collapse. How could such a vibrant, interconnected world fall apart so quickly and so completely? What forces could have brought down not just one, but nearly every major civilization in the region? The answer, as we now know, lies in a perfect storm of crises. Environmental disasters such as prolonged droughts and earthquakes struck at the heart of these societies. Social unrest and internal rebellions weakened them from within, and political turmoil, invasions, and the mysterious arrival of the so-called Sea Peoples pushed these civilizations to the brink. To truly understand the collapse of the Late Bronze Age, we must look closely at the pressures, both human and natural, that converged to bring a golden age to a sudden, dramatic end. Only then can we appreciate the fragility of even the most powerful civilizations, and the lessons their downfall holds for us today. Recent scientific evidence reveals that a devastating, centuries-long drought struck the eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BCE. This wasn't just a few dry years. Tree rings, pollen, and ancient letters all point to a prolonged arid period that crippled agriculture. Societies built on surplus grain like the Hittites and Mycenaeans saw their food supplies dwindle and their administrative systems buckle under the strain. Letters from the time plead desperately for grain, showing how dire the crisis became. The drought didn't topple empires overnight, but it fatally weakened their foundations, making them vulnerable to further shocks. Environmental disaster set the stage for everything that followed. The drought led directly to famine. Granaries were empty and hunger was everywhere. Archaeological finds show cities already starving before their destruction, unable to withstand siege or support armies. Letters from Ugarit and skeletal remains reveal the depth of the crisis: malnutrition, disease, and despair. Famine broke the social contract between rulers and people, fueling unrest and migration. As hunger spread, entire communities abandoned their homes, searching for survival elsewhere. Famine was not just a tragedy, it was a catalyst for chaos and mass movement. Starvation forced people to flee, triggering massive migrations across the ancient world. Populations in Greece, Anatolia, and the Levant plummeted. Some regions lost up to 90% of their inhabitants. Abandoned cities and villages became the new normal and the landscape emptied out. Migrants clashed with settled populations, spreading violence and instability. The collapse wasn't just political, it was a demographic catastrophe that erased skills, traditions, and social order. Urban centers vanished, writing was forgotten, and society fragmented into isolated rural communities. These migrations both resulted from and intensified the collapse, ensuring a long, difficult recovery. The ancient world was fundamentally reshaped. Amid the chaos, a new threat emerged: the mysterious Sea Peoples. Egyptian records describe waves of invaders from across the Mediterranean, likely displaced by famine and collapse. These confederations attacked cities along the coast, burning places like Ugarit and toppling the Hittite Empire. The Sea Peoples weren't the sole cause of the collapse, but they delivered the final blow to already weakened kingdoms. Egypt barely survived their onslaught, but at great cost, its empire was lost forever. The Sea Peoples remain an enigma, both victims and agents of destruction, embodying the human face of the crisis. Their arrival marked the end of the old order. The Late Bronze Age thrived on international trade. Copper, tin, and luxury goods flowed across the Mediterranean. But as famine and instability spread, trade routes broke down. Shipwrecks from before the collapse show a rich mix of cargo. After 1200 BCE, such evidence vanishes. Regions turned inward, cut off from vital resources and markets. The collapse of trade crippled economies, especially those dependent on imports, and deepened the crisis. The interconnectedness that once brought prosperity now ensured that failure in one region spread everywhere. The globalized system became a fatal weakness. With trade gone and crops failing, palace economies unraveled. Central authorities couldn't pay soldiers or feed workers, leading to mass desertion and banditry. Archaeology shows palaces hastily fortified, fearing not just invaders but their own desperate people. The entire social and political order collapsed. Kingship, bureaucracy, and hierarchy vanished. Power fragmented into small local units. People reverted to subsistence farming and village life. The breakdown was total, and rebuilding would take centuries. The collapse was not just a fall of cities, but of an entire way of life. The Late Bronze Age collapse was not just a single event, but a cascading systemic failure. A house of cards brought down by a series of interconnected crises. Imagine a world where every piece depends on the next, where the fall of one can trigger the collapse of all. This was the reality for the great civilizations of the Late Bronze Age, whose fates were tied together in a delicate balance. Their world's complexity and specialization, which had once been their greatest strengths, became fatal weaknesses when disaster struck. When droughts withered the fields and cut off the grain supply, when trade routes that once bustled with goods and ideas suddenly failed, and when mighty empires that had seemed unshakable began to crumble, the entire system buckled under the weight of its own interdependence. Every link in the chain was vital, and when enough links broke, the whole structure gave way. No single crisis was decisive, nor was there one villain or disaster to blame. Instead, it was the relentless combination of challenges, drought, famine, invasion, internal strife, and economic collapse, that battered these societies from every direction. Together, these overlapping catastrophes overwhelmed every society's ability to adapt. Leaders and citizens alike found themselves powerless, unable to respond to the sheer scale and speed of the unfolding disaster. The very systems that had brought prosperity now became traps, leaving people isolated and desperate. There was no one left to call for help. Everyone was in crisis. The networks that once connected cities and kingdoms became silent, as each community struggled for survival on its own. The lesson is clear: interconnectedness brings both prosperity and vulnerability. The more tightly bound a system, the more it can achieve, but also, the more it risks when things go wrong. The very ties that create strength can also transmit shock and disaster. The collapse was not due to backwardness or ignorance. These were advanced societies with skilled artisans, complex governments, and thriving trade networks. In fact, it was the very sophistication of these ancient societies, their reliance on intricate systems and specialized roles, that made them so vulnerable when the unexpected struck. Their achievements were remarkable, but they left little room for error. Their world was too optimized for stability, and too brittle to survive change. In the end, it was not a lack of progress, but the fragility of their interconnected world that brought about their downfall. The collapse of the Bronze Age marked the end of an era defined by gleaming palaces, powerful city-states, and the thunder of chariots across the land. Once, these grand civilizations flourished, their influence stretching across continents, their wealth and knowledge seemingly unshakable. But in a matter of decades, this world unraveled, leaving behind only silent ruins and scattered memories. The collapse plunged the region into centuries of darkness and uncertainty. Cities that once bustled with life became empty shells, their streets overtaken by weeds and silence. Trade routes vanished, and the skills and crafts that had defined the age were nearly lost to time. Yet even in the midst of devastation, hope persisted. From the ashes of the old world, new peoples began to emerge, bringing with them fresh ideas, technologies, and ways of life. The seeds of renewal were quietly taking root, even as the world seemed shrouded in darkness. The power vacuum left by the collapse allowed groups like the Israelites and Philistines to rise to prominence. These once marginalized peoples seized the opportunity to carve out their own destinies, establishing new communities and traditions that would shape the region for centuries to come. Across the landscape, new city-states began to form, each one a testament to human resilience and adaptability. People gathered together, rebuilt their homes, and forged new alliances, determined to survive and thrive in a changed world. The scarcity of tin, once essential for making bronze, forced societies to seek alternatives. This challenge spurred the adoption of iron, a metal that was more abundant and, with time, proved even more versatile and powerful. The arrival of iron transformed every aspect of life. Agriculture became more productive as iron tools replaced their bronze predecessors, and warfare was revolutionized by stronger, sharper weapons. The Iron Age had begun, setting the stage for new empires and innovations. Life during this so-called Dark Age was undeniably harsh. People faced famine, conflict, and the constant threat of the unknown. The comforts and certainties of the past were gone, replaced by struggle and adaptation. But adversity became a crucible for innovation and renewal. Communities learned to adapt, to create new art, technologies, and social structures. Out of hardship, creativity flourished, and the foundations of a new world were laid. From the ruins of the collapse, the great empires, alphabets, and religions of the Iron Age began to grow. Writing systems evolved, new forms of governance emerged, and spiritual beliefs took root, shaping the course of history for generations. In this endless cycle of destruction and creation, humanity found the strength to rebuild and reimagine its future. The world was forever changed, but from the darkness, a new age dawned, one that would shape the destiny of civilizations yet to come.